Eugene Peterson writes this about the Hebrew understanding of Sabbath life. The evening-morning sequence conditions us to the rhythms of grace. We go to sleep and God begins his work. As we sleep, he develops his covenant. We wake and are called out to participate in God's creative action. We respond in faith, in work. But always grace is previous. Grace is primary. We wake into a world we didn't make, into a salvation we didn't earn. With this reality in mind, and aware of God's goodness and invitation, we too can receive the gift of Sabbath. We stop, rest, delight, and worship. And as we practice this way of Jesus, we learn to be and we get to breathe.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Matt, if you don't know me. And one quick thing, in your seat backs in front of you, unless you're in the front row, then I apologize, there's no seat backs in front of you. There's these encouragement cards. If you want to encourage anybody who got baptized today, you can write those out or fill them in and then hand them into the info center just outside these doors over here, and we'll make sure they get to those who are baptized today. This has been really fun, hasn't it? This is, I think, marks like 6 weeks in a row with baptisms. Jesus is up to something very good. And like Eugene Peterson said in the video, not because of the hard work we're doing, but because he's up to something. Grace is always previous. Grace is always primary. We live and move based on grace. This month, we want to talk about how do we live into that grace better. And so as we do, let's pray. Jesus, we just want to stop, and before anything else, we want to worship you. You're so good. You are constantly on the move. You are taking dead people and bringing them back to life. You are doing your work of new creation. We want to pause and remember that. We pray that as we sit under the word now, that you'd come and you'd speak. We bless you that you are the God who speaks, and you've got good news for us this morning. And so we want to hear from you. Would you open our ears to hear you, Jesus? Open our eyes to see how you're moving. Would you come in your peace? Amen. Does anybody here find themselves really busy? Anybody? Show of hands? Yeah. Anybody feel like they're in need of a rest? Anybody counting down the days till their vacation? Anyone feel like life is just flying by and it's hard to keep up? Anybody feel like Christmas just happened and here we are 6 months later almost? I said just happened, not coming. Easy. The world seems to move really quick, doesn't it? We are a busy people. Alexis Madrigal in The Atlantic wrote a few years ago, technological optimists sold the world on automation by telling people it would create unimaginable amounts of leisure for them. The big question for the workers of the 21st century would be, how do they spend their copious amounts of free time? Anybody feel that way here? Sam and I were just talking yesterday. What do we do with all this free time we have? It's amazing. I could never imagine the amount of leisure we have. The Jetsons looked forward to what's now only 29 years in the future, to a land of flying cars and a briefcase car, and George's difficult, terrible 9-hour work week, where George would work 3 hours a day and complain about how hard it was. This wasn't some pie-in-the-sky thing, though. It wasn't like they were going counterculture. They assumed this is what the world would be like by this point, with all our labor-saving devices, that we would find ourselves with free time. Our technology was supposed to make our lives easier, But if anything, it's done the opposite. It's made our lives harder. Instead of making it difficult to know when to work, we're finding it difficult to know when to stop. Especially a few years ago when we all of a sudden had to start working from home and our office and our bedroom became the same place. We are busy, anxious, frantic people who love to multitask and who, when asked how we are, respond with, busy. Anybody relate to any of that? Question is, how do we live in another way? The prophet Jeremiah writes this. This is what the Lord says: stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it, and you will find rest for your souls. And so this month we are looking at the ancient ways, at the most ancient of practices, that of Sabbath. Sabbath begins right at the beginning. And so the question is, what is Sabbath? Well, the first of the two creation stories, because Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are two different creation stories, the first of the creation stories begins this way. There are 6 days of creation. On the first 3 days, God makes the heavens and the sea and the land. In the next 3 days, he fills those. He puts in the sun, the moon, the stars, the air and the sea creatures, and the land animals, and finally, people. And every day he calls his creation good. And then he ends by saying it's very good. Because God makes a good creation. The world we live in is a very good place. Creation was made intentionally good by a good God, and it reflects his goodness. And then he put us in the middle of it to reflect his goodness. And then on the 7th day, which happens to fall in Genesis 2, because a medieval monk who put in chapters and verse in the Bible, which, God bless him, that must have been a lot of work. Like Genesis wasn't a scroll that was handed down with chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4 in verses. Instead, it was just a scroll, and then a monk added in later. He made the mistake of putting Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 to 3 in the second chapter, which makes it seem like it's part of the second story. But instead, it culminates days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We read this: thus the heavens and the earth were complete in all their vast array. And by the 7th day, God had finished the work he'd been doing. And on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. And then God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work he had done. On the 7th day, we read God stops creating and starts resting. He'd finished his good work, and now he adds another piece to his good work. A day that's not for doing, but a day for stopping. The word here for rest is the word Sabbath, which means rest and stop, to cease, to be still. And then we read that God makes it holy. This is the first thing we read in Scripture that's holy. It's the Sabbath. To be holy is to be set apart. God sets this day apart from all the other days. And thus, into the creation of the world, into the rhythms of our universe, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, stop. Sabbath. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, stop. Sabbath. He puts rhythm into the very fabric of the universe that ends with resting. Not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but he wants to stop and mark that time and say, just like I rested, I have rest for you. And then we don't read much about Sabbath until we come to Exodus. The Israelites have been in Egypt for some time. We know they were there for 400 years, but what we don't know is how long they were enslaved there. But probably for generations, they are enslaved. And then God rescues them through Moses and these 12 plagues, and they come to Mount Sinai in the wilderness, and they are given the 10 Commandments, the longest of which is this: remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that's in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. To remember in the Hebrew is to be mindful, to practice, to set aside, to observe. God is saying, remember this thing that was lost to you. By taking the seventh day and keeping it holy, keeping it separate from the other days, you come in line with how you were always created to be. There are days to work, 6 of them, but there's also a day to rest. So rest. And not just you, but everyone. Do you see how God walks them through all the different people in society, and including their animals that do their work, and says, this isn't just for you. This isn't just for you to do, and then make your kids clean the house, which we know how well that works anyways. You might as well just be working the whole time. This is for everyone. So don't be tempted to think you can Sabbath and everybody else can work. Instead, this is a day to rest. Now, when we think of the 10 Commandments, we think of rules to live by. And no one really goes around celebrating lying or adultery or envy or stealing, right? It's not like we sit in the lobby after church and brag about, the other day I went to the bank and I wrote a fake check and cashed it. No, we don't brag about those things, but then we get here and we talk about, I'm really busy. Things are going well. I've worked a lot lately. No, I'll rest later. That's when vacation comes. And then we get to vacation, we stack it so full that we don't actually rest because, and then we end vacation going, I could really use a vacation. We don't know how to rest. We don't know how to do this. This is foreign to our world. This is foreign to the land of technology that we found ourselves in, foreign to this way of operating that we have where electricity has replaced the need to actually go to bed because the lights can stay on. We can keep reading or watching Netflix or whatever it is we do. We can get up early. At this time of year, we can't actually stay up late enough or get up early enough, basically. The sun is always up. But in winter, we don't actually know how, do we? We have phones that notify us and keep us going in work, that keep us this close to it. Our minds are always constantly running with things. And we actually just need to stop. Now, I don't know about you, but up until the first couple of years as a pastor, so coming on about 16 years from now, or 16 years ago, I didn't know we had to Sabbath. I didn't even know this was something we should do. In fact, I actually thought Jesus hated Sabbath. The reason is because what do we see Jesus butting heads with the Pharisees about the most? It's the Sabbath, right? And what happens on the Sabbath. And so we have to take a look at the scriptures and see what happens here. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask about what happens with Jesus and Sabbath. Well, in Luke 6, we read this. One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples began to pick some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands and eating the kernels. And some of the Pharisees asked, why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? Jesus answered them, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what was lawful only for the priest to eat. He also gave some to his companions. Then Jesus said, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. On another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching. And a man who was there, whose right hand was shriveled. The Pharisees and the teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. It's almost like they knew what he was going to do. But Jesus knew what they were thinking. And he said to the man with the shriveled hand, get up and stand in front of everyone. So he got up and stood there. And then Jesus said to them, I ask you, what is lawful on the Sabbath? Is it to do good or to do evil? To save a life or destroy it? He looked around at all of them, and then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he did so, and his hand was completely restored. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious and began to discuss with Jesus. or with one another, what they might do to Jesus. Over the last couple of years, we've been talking a few times about how Jesus and the Pharisees would butt heads over the idea about fences around the law. If you've been here for a few years, you might know that. If not, I'll give you just a brief example. What happens is you've got all these laws in the Old Testament. You want to make sure the people don't break the laws. So what you do, much like if you have a pool in your backyard, is you put a fence around to make sure nobody falls in the pool. Or with the baptism tank because, well, you guys saw Christina and you're probably nervous that she might fall in because it's close. So you put a fence around the pool to make sure nobody falls in. And what happens, the Pharisees were really concerned about people following all the rules, and so they would start with a fence here and go, we got to have a fence right here so nobody falls in, but then you start adding more fences and more fences and more fences. You put rules upon rules upon rules to make sure nobody breaks the original rule. The problem comes, though, is when all the rules matter just as much. So in this case, we have farmers who harvest grain. For a farmer to harvest grain on Sabbath would be work. And so, you better not work. And so the fence becomes harvesting grain on Sabbath is work. Nobody can harvest grain on Sabbath. Nobody can pick grain. Nobody can do anything with grain. Or doctors heal. That's work. And so you set up another fence of nobody's allowed to heal on Sabbath because doctors do that. And so you have these rules that get added to rules that get added to rules. And that's what Jesus came to push back against. Good thing we never do that, right? Jesus says the Son of Man is Lord over the Sabbath. Jesus is far greater than Sabbath because he made Sabbath. And as Lord, he knows the best way for it to be lived. And he says it's to do good. It's to bring life. These days are for goodness. Goodness pulls us right back to the garden, to the way things always were meant to be. Jesus says, live into that reality. Bring blessing to the world. And then in Mark's account of the story, he adds, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. The problem with legalism, though, is it swaps those ideas. And it says, we are made for Sabbath, so we better make sure we don't break it. We better make sure we don't do the wrong thing, because then Sabbath will be mad at us, and God will be mad at us. The danger of Sabbath that the Pharisees fell into was legalism, of trying to find a one-size-fits-all approach to Sabbath. And in the process, it became this heavy weight instead of what it was intended to be. And so what's it for then? Well, to better understand, we need to head back to Egypt. The Israelites had been enslaved for generations, and hardwired into them, we've got to assume, is this: you work always, and you work hard. You are a machine with no brakes. You can run forever until you can't run anymore and die. At a certain point, you have to assume hardwired into them is that life is all about productivity, that they don't matter outside of what they produce, which might sound a little familiar to some of you. In Deuteronomy, as the people are about to enter into the promised land, God once again reminds the people of the Ten Commandments. And it looks a little different this time when it comes to Sabbath. We read, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. As the Lord your God commanded you, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, your male or female servant, not your ox or donkey or any other animal, nor the foreigner residing in your town, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out of the land with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. Why are they to observe a Sabbath now? Let's remember they're no longer slaves. And now, when you get in the land, don't be like that. Don't inflict this on others. God's giving them a gift, the gift of Sabbath. You are not what you make. You are not machines. You are not what you produce. Sabbath is a gift. And not just for them, but for everyone. When you enter this new land, you need to be different, a different people. And so what is Sabbath? Sabbath is a gift. For some of us, though, we've had experience with Sabbath, where it evokes some kind of dread, where we think of a day of rules and boredom, imagining all the things we can't do instead of what we can. This is a distortion of its intent. Sabbath is called the queen or the bride. It's a gift. It's a delight. It's designed to be a day of feasting and celebration, enjoying the goodness of the good God who created the good creation. It's to be a day of worship, remembering our God and placing him back on the throne that we keep trying to take him off of. It's a day of strategic non-productivity, a day to allow God to recreate us. And so following the teachings of Marva Dawn and John Mark Comer, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at Sabbath over this month and talking about 4 things: stopping, resting, delighting, and worship. Today we're going to talk about stopping. So the first thing is, why do we need to stop? I think we all know. We live life without margins. We live out of touch with the world and its rhythms. We constantly are bombarded with information, with notifications, with busyness. We like to hustle and hurry. Maybe some of you, even on the way to church this morning, found yourself in a hurry, and maybe you said some things you regret. You can say sorry now. Our world loves hurry a lot. There's this idea of hurry sickness, which is a continuous struggle and unremitting attempt to accomplish or achieve more and more things, or participate in more and more events in less and less time. This is something we're very familiar with. And the influx of social media and cell phones and texting has only increased this as we see all the things that other people are doing, and we either go, why wasn't I invited? Or I should be there, or I should do that. And we find ourselves constantly pulled in different directions. In his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, John Mark Comer writes 10 symptoms of hurry sickness. Feel free to check these off as we go. Irritability, hypersensitivity, restlessness, workaholism or just nonstop activity, emotional numbness, out-of-order priorities, lack of care for your body, escapist behavior, slippage of spiritual disciplines, and isolation. Anybody check those all off before they got out of bed this morning? I think we're pretty aware of these things. Hurry is a big problem for us. Dallas Willard, the philosopher and theologian, said, hurry is the great enemy of the spiritual life in our day. You must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And Ronald Rolheiser writes, pathological busyness, distraction, and restlessness are major blocks today within our spiritual lives. Our hurry and our busyness keep us from being present to the God who is present to us. Our culture is designed in a way that we never stop. We aren't stopping and seeing the growth in our lives, maybe because we never slow down, maybe because we never reflect. Gordon MacDonald says, beware of the barrenness of the busy life. It's possible that maybe the reason we're not growing in the ways that we hope is because we don't actually stop to slow down and let God do his work. In Psalm 46:10, God says, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know. It's hard to be still if you never stop, isn't it? One of the invitations of Sabbath is stopping and enjoying silence. It's in the silence that we hear God's voice. Our world's so noisy. And Sabbath is an opportunity to disconnect from that noise so that we can actually hear. so that we can become more and more aware of the one who is present to us. I listened to this podcast about the Desert Fathers and Mothers, and on it, the two hosts were talking about how in their ministry lives they've spent so much time teaching people to listen to God's voice, but they realized they never actually took time to teach people how to be silent first. They were reflecting on how it's really easy to go to listening without being silent because there's productivity to be found in listening in a way that there isn't in being silent. Silence can feel like wasted time. What if it's the same with resting? What if before we rest, we need to learn how to stop? We go on vacations, like I said earlier, and we pack as much as we can in. And we end vacation and we wonder why we're still tired. We go from thing to thing, event to event, calendar full to calendar full. And then we wonder why we don't feel rested. And it's not just for those of us that work, for those of us with little kids, or those who are in school. We all do this. We all run without limits. Marva Dawn writes, to cease from the week itself, or cease not from the week itself, but also from the need to accomplish and be productive. From worry and tension that accompany our modern criterion of efficiency. From our efforts to be in control of our lives as if we were God. From our possessiveness and enculturation, and finally from the humdrum and meaninglessness that result when life is pursued without God at the center of it all. There's a lot that we actually could find help in ceasing from. And maybe the invitation for us this morning, for some of you, it's just marking a day of the week, probably Sunday, if you don't work today, and saying, I'm going to try and rest. I'm going to try and stop. Today will be the day that I choose to not clean the house. Today will be the day that I saw that nod over there from Wesley. Today will be that day. Today will be the day that I turn off notifications on my phone or I don't check my email. Today's the day where I don't do that thing that feels like work to me. Today's the day where I intentionally begin stopping, resting, delighting, and worshiping. But here's the truth. For those of us in our culture, Sabbath is hard work. It's hard work to change a mindset and a worldview. It's nearly impossible. And so you have to keep pushing and pushing and pushing. Neuroscientists talk about how we need to keep running habits over and over again because that puts new grooves in our brain so that information travels quicker down them. It's called neuroplasticity. The more and more you do something, the easier it becomes. Problem is we've run grooves of go, 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 hustle, 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 hurry, 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 do this, do that. And now to run another groove is going to take a long eroding. But we can. We can choose to believe that life isn't actually about productivity and busyness. That you're not who you or what you do or how well you do it. Instead, at your core, you're beloved. You matter to the God who made you, just because you're you. Remember, this God who made you is the same one who made the birds of the air and the flowers of the field. And he delights in them and cares for them. And just as most of what they do is unproductive, you can have unproductivity too. But we have to learn a whole other way of living. We need to deprogram our brains from productivity and instead lean into trust that if we stop working, it might just be okay. Part of the hard work is also that we need to be patient and kind to ourselves. One thing about the hard work of Sabbath is what is Sabbath for someone is not Sabbath for another. We have to fight legalism because it's really easy to move in this. Perhaps for some of you, you work with your brains all week long. A good Sabbath practice might be to work with your hands. For me, one of my Sabbath practices for a long time was renovating my house. Then all of a sudden, the renos got to be too much, and it was work, so I had to stop. For others of you, work with your hands all week long. And so Sabbath practices might mean using your brain a little bit in different ways, like reading or something like that. Wendell Berry, a farmer, 6 days a week, is a poet on the seventh. 6 days are for working with his hands, seventh is for creating with words. I don't know what Sabbath is going to look like for you. I can't tell you. I don't know what you feel like is work and what isn't. But don't try and force your Sabbath on someone else. We have to reject legalism. The next thing is your children are not the enemy of your Sabbath, for you young parents in the room. I love Eugene Peterson. For those of you who've been around here for a while, it's no secret probably. Eugene Peterson in his books writes about his Sabbath practice, which looks like him and his wife going for a hike every Sabbath. And the whole way up the mountain, they're quiet and just reflecting on their week. Then they get together at the top and have a lunch, and they walk down and talk on the way down. And I look at that and go, wow, that sounds idyllic and wonderful. Or before we had kids, my Sabbath practice, a lot of it looked like making a pot of coffee, reading a book, playing video games, doing some renovations maybe, washing dishes because I wanted to give my washing machine a break, and also washing dishes by hands really slows me down a lot. Now I have kids. And a few years ago, was reflecting on Sabbath, and just like, I can't do that, I've got little ones. And I felt like a strong word from Jesus. And it was that. Your children are not the enemy of your Sabbath. Young parents, I know it's hard. I'm in the thick of it too. So how do we find small things? So for us, one of our Sabbath practices is I get up early on Sunday or Saturday morning. Saturdays are Sabbath because I work on Sundays. And I let Sam sleep in, and I make like one of 3 things that I know how to make. Actually, I make 2 of them because pancakes and waffles are actually the same batter. I'm really good at putting chocolate chips in them too. I know, but it's an opportunity for me to make something and for Sam to sleep because she doesn't get to, because in the night the kids only want her. One of my friends, his Sabbath practice is he has 3 kids, so one week, one kid picks what the thing of delight will be that week, the next week another kid, and next week another kid. We need one another to figure these things out. We need creativity. Perhaps you found something. We're all trying to figure this out. Share with each other in your life groups or talk to one another in the lobby. We need to learn. But what a gift it would be for our kids if we pass Sabbath on to them. And what a gift it would be for our kids if we Sabbath ourselves. And so as we wrap up here, I'm going to get the worship team to come up, and we're going to go to the table. But a question I'd like you to ask Jesus today is, Jesus, how are you inviting me to stop? The good news is, even though our world runs without limits and makes demands on us constantly, Jesus is not this way. And so asking Jesus, what's a practical way that I can stop? And what do I need to stop from? Because Jesus doesn't demand endless productivity over you. Instead, like we read in the message, are you tired, worn out, burned on religion? Are you tired of the legalism that tells you what you can and can't do? Well, then come to me. Get away with me and recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn how to live freely and lightly.